breezes seem to whisper I love you. Birds singing in the sycamore tree. Dream a little dream of me. Say nighty-night and kiss me. Just hold me tight and tell me you'll miss me. Well, I'm as blue as can be. Dream a little dream of me.
Stars fading, but I linger on, dear. Still craving your kiss. I'm longing to linger.
Well, we're in North Carolina. I live in a little town called Rocky Ford, which is just a crossroads. And I keep telling people I'm on a mission to put Rocky Ford on the map, because if somebody knocks the sign down, I think Rocky Ford's going to disappear. So I've got an extra Rocky Ford sign. If they ever knock it down, I'm going to put another one up. It's called a Pompeii-style oven. Kind of prototype plans for it, not a complete set of plans, are posted on the internet by Forno Bravo, a company that sells pizza ovens. When they first started, they were trying to encourage people to build wood-fired ovens. And I started with that set of plans and studied the hell out of them. And because I was building mine a lot larger than most of the ovens are like in the range of about 36 inches inside, and mine is 56 inches. And I wanted it bigger to be able to support putting 2 full sheet trays in there to bake breads. And the smaller ovens, by the time you get a fire in there and you get your pizza in there, you're sort of like, you're out of space. By all standards, this oven is probably as big as, or bigger than most commercial ones that you could buy and assemble yourself. I suspect that this oven will be here for about 1,000 years, and when all these properties and they cut the trees and somebody comes along one day, they're going to say, what in the hell's this thing? They'll probably do some research and find out that this jackass in Rocky Ford, Bob Radcliffe, built it. Took me, actually I started with this building because the building was falling down. I reconstructed the building, didn't have a shed. And I decided on this side I was going to build this shed, concrete pad underneath. It's got 2 slabs here, by the way. I got like a work slab and a slab under the oven because there's so much weight on it. I wanted that to be able to settle differentially or settle separately because of the weight of it. It's got reinforced concrete. It's got probably 1,000 or 1,500 equivalent bricks in it. There's a lot of weight there. A pizza is a tomato pie on steroids. Okay, so a tomato pie is a very basic pie that I remember I had as a child in Trenton, New Jersey. At DeLorenzo's Pizza was a famous pizza place. It's in all the history books of pizza in the U.S. You always come back to DeLorenzo's on Hudson Street in Trenton, New Jersey. I went there as a kid. They used to cook them in a coal-fire oven. And they actually would shovel the coals, cook it in a separate place, and bring the coals in and put it under a cooking surface, which was like metal. And they would bake the pies, the tomato pies, on that surface. Sort of like how in North Carolina they do barbecue. They do the wood, and they get the embers, and they move it under the meat, and they cook it real slow. Well, coal is really hot. It burns at about 1,000 degrees. It's actually too hot. I can burn coal in here, but the oven's already in the dome part up at 1,000 degrees. I don't need it any hotter. It's plenty hot. They used to cook on the coal-fired oven, and the pies were always very crisp, almost a little bit burnt. Very simple. Just bread, good bread, tomatoes, just a touch of little sausage. That was about it. And they were delicious, and I still remember them. And sort of what I've done is try to recreate to the extent I can something similar to that here. I call them tomato pies. In North Carolina, they don't really know what a tomato pie is. They think it's something that you bake and you put mayonnaise on it with tomatoes, and it's sort of like a dessert. So I've got a little uphill battle educating North Carolina on tomato pies. I think people are going to catch on to the fact that it's the simplicity. I don't make the nouveau pies. I don't put the pineapple on them and all the other stuff that you go out to get a pie today, you get a pizza, they load it up. I want a pie that's just basic, essentially the crispy crust, not too big on cheese, just the tomatoes and maybe a little bit of sausage, just a little bit of accent on there. That's what I like the best, and that's what I'm baking, and I think people are slowly discovering it. I think they're going to find it. They really would like to move away from all this, the humongous gungo stuff on a piece of bread. and move it back to a crisp, thin crust that's not soggy. You can pick it up. It's crispy, and it's got the nice tomatoes, just a good tomato flavor. A little on the sweet side, but real garden fresh type tomato. That's why I built my oven. I built it so I could bake pizzas, tomato pies, and I wanted to do artisan breads. And basically, artisan breads are breads that are sort of slow fermentation breads, real high using flour. The flours that you use are very high protein content, and it gives you a crispy, crunchy bread. Down south, all we have is a lot of low protein, very light flour that makes biscuits, and everybody eats biscuits down here. I'm from the north, and I really miss the sort of the Italian rolls and the crunch on it, and a tomato pie or a pizza with a crust on it that crunches. And to get that kind of thing, you do need an oven that's better than a household oven. A household oven runs maximum about 550 degrees. And you can do a decent pie in an oven with a pizza stone, but we're talking here like at the top, 1,000 degrees on the surface, probably 650, something like that. And it's intense heat. It's not like in an oven, you kind of have a baking stone. The dough takes the heat out and it's dropping all the time. The temperature's dropping. This oven's like a heat sink. The floor of the oven is 650 degrees or whatever. You put the pie on there, it stays 650 degrees. So it cooks that crust right through. It doesn't taper down in temperature and then come back up. That's what ruins most food. When you're cooking any kind of food, if your temperature is sagging and fluctuating up and down, you're always going to have something that doesn't taste quite as good. Basically, I've done effectively a lot of agriculture research, my own research of growing test gardens with tomatoes. Tried to grow tomatoes I could use on my tomato pies, and after a number of years of experimentation and growing, I finally concluded to just buy good imported San Marzano tomatoes from Italy. They have what I call terroir. In other words, if you are into wine at all, you always hear people talk about wine having terroir, the taste of the land. In other words, depending on what soils it's growing in and the slope to the sun and where it's located, you get a grape that has a little different character. It's the same with tomatoes. All agricultural products have terroir. They depend on the soil you're in and the minerals and the type of content of the soil that comes up into the plant and into the fruit. And for whatever reason, San Marzano has always come out as being historically the best in the Italian realm for a plum paste tomato, for that types of making sauces or toppings on pies. So that's what I use now. I buy them in Philadelphia. We lived in Philly for 20 years. My wife Carrie goes up to Philly a couple times every month or so. We'll come back with 4, 6, 8 cases of tomatoes. They get imported from Italy directly into Philadelphia port, and you can buy them there wholesale. And so they're a real thing. Thanks to Peter Reinhardt, who is a really world-renowned author of artisan breads and pizza books. He's out of Charlotte, works for Johnson & Wales Culinary University. I corresponded with Peter, and he sort of got interested in what I was doing with this tomato pie thing in North Carolina, because there's nobody else doing it. He sort of asked me, he said, well, could you write a guest column for my website, which is pizzaquest.com? And I said, yeah, and I sat down and worked on an article. I sent it to Peter, and he said, geez, a great article, but he says, I really needed to, can you integrate some other story into it, like your farm stuff and the whole process. And I said I thought I could, but I'd never done that kind of writing. But I sort of sat down, I sort of had an idea that I would write a 6 to 8 part series that would kind of cover the whole development of process that I've gone through to build the pizzas that I'm making today. And it's taken a lot of years of experimentation because nobody taught me how to do it. And I just had an interest in trying to replicate the sort of the flavor and the sense of what that tomato pie was that I used to get when I was like 5 or 6 years old in Trenton at DeLorenzo's. What sort of started as kind of an article, Peter said, well, why don't you just write a series? And so I've published, I guess, 4 of 7 articles now. There's going to be 7 in the series that'll cover everything, every aspect of making the pie, from the choice of the dough and the flour issues and the tomatoes and the cheese and the toppings and the whole manner in which I build the pie, which is kind of upside down from the pizza world. Cheese is on the bottom, and All my toppings go on the pie after it comes out of the oven. I don't put any oil on the pie. The oil goes on afterwards, like you're building a focaccia. You know, if you do focaccia breads, if you ever had them, you put the oil in, it just sucks it in. If you eat my pie, you're never going to burn your mouth. I always put the oil on last. You're going to see that later on. It goes on the crust and it warms it up. And my toppings go on last. They're not burned up, and they get heated by the pie. When the pie comes out of the oven, it's real hot. It cools down, but the toppings absorb the heat. So by the time you sit down to eat it, it's just everything is just nice. Your toppings, your mushrooms, your spinach, you know, your oil and everything is just at a nice temperature. I don't think, if people read the 7-part series, I don't think anybody's going to want to replicate what I did. I did test gardens, I grew test garlic gardens, and I grew test tomato gardens, and I've tried and made my own cheeses, my own mozzarella cheese. I've made flavored cheeses. I mean, anything you could do with the ingredients of a pie, I've sort of done it, and I've sort of selected out the things that I thought worked out the best. And that's what I'm doing now, and I'm still experimenting, so it's not like it's over. What I hope to do by publishing this is to kind of reinvigorate people to get out of the rut and get out of the box they're in with thinking about what a pizza is. It's round and they serve it on a cardboard tray. I always serve mine on metal trays. These are the kind of trays that we had back in the 1950s. And when you finish eating your pie, you always had oil and little pieces, and you take your crust and you could rub on there and eat it all up. You can't do that with cardboard, guys. You know, when you got a cardboard thing, it's terrible. So eating a pie is like, it's more of an experience, and I'm trying to bring that old kind of 1950s experience back for people, to have a pie that is authentic in a sense. It's clean. It's just the bread, it's just the tomatoes, and real clean flavors. Kind of on the crispy side. Some people don't like things that looks a little burned, but that's really got a charred taste to it. It's in a wood-fired oven, which gives it some flavor. You guys are going to eat it in a little while, so you can draw your own conclusion. But everybody that eats it seems to find it's really different, and not just different meaning bad different, but amazing different. And so that's what I'm doing. You got to be a little crazy to do this. It's a hot day here today, and I got 50 people coming. I'm going to feed 50 people pizzas. The dough I use is not a traditional pizza dough. It's an artisan bread dough. If you're making artisan breads, it usually takes about 2 days. You start the dough, you refrigerate it and delay the fermentation. You're always talking about long fermentation, high hydration, meaning high % moisture. That's why it's so sticky. Like when I take it out of here, it's real wet. It's not a dry dough. And that's characteristic of artisan breads. Long fermentation gives you flavor. The high hydration gives you that characteristic, sort of light and airy. It kind of opens up when you cook it. And never tastes like flour. If you take these artisan breads, like it usually takes 2 days. If you try to cook them at 1 day, they taste floury. By 2 days, the way the enzymes break down the flour and the content of the actual wheat itself gives you the flavor. You can't get that any other way. You have to have slow fermentation with yeast over a longer period of time. It's like brewing beer. Most pizzas are not made with artisan bread, in other words, dough. In other words, normally a pizza dough is a 1-day thing. You make it and you cook it. And it generally doesn't have the same characteristics. When you guys eat this stuff later, you'll see there's a difference, and you just can't short it. You know, you got to spend the time. You got to give it 2 days. I want a very crisp dough, so I use a very high percentage protein flour. So I purchased a special flour. Basically comes out of King Arthur flour out of Vermont. Actually is where I'm getting it from. But there's only a few places in the country that grow wheat with a very high percentage of protein. It's up 15.5%. Whereas if you were doing biscuits, like biscuit flour is real light. You can feel it's real light and soft. That's like 8.5% protein. This stuff, when you actually rub the flour, like this stuff, it feels different. And you get used to it as you work with flours more. You can sort of tell whether it's a harder flour or a softer flour. But that protein builds up the infrastructure on the dough. You notice when I window painted before and you build up all that netting in there, that's what gives you that texture. So that when you bake it, it gives you that crispness and it crunches because it's got structural strength there. Most people don't want to fool with artisan breads because they don't have the time. They've got bread machines. They want to dump it all in a bread machine, turn it on, go to work, come home, get some bread, and they said he made some bread. Well, it's okay, but it's kind of like eating, Wonder Bread, out of the food store. It's white and it's bread, but it just doesn't have any taste. There really is no way of getting the flavor out of the breads unless you ferment it. It's kind of like, it's like akin to doing brewing and beer. It's the same idea. Long, slow fermentation breaks down. There's a lot of processes and enzymes going on that break it down and give it the flavor. If it has that kind of noticeable flavor, and you're probably familiar with, say, sourdough. Sourdoughs, they take even longer. I mean, you build up a sourdough base, it might take you a week or 2 weeks to get the base. And then you continually refresh it, and you add that base to some other flour to make a loaf of bread. And it's got that tanginess to it, and that's a different kind of fermentation. Everything we do in the baking world, you weigh everything. You weigh all the contents. If you don't weigh the contents, you can't reproduce bread. You weigh the flour, you weigh the water, you weigh the yeast, you weigh the salt, you weigh everything. And everything is expressed in what we call baker's percentage, which says it's a percentage of the weight of the flour. So if you have 1 pound of flour, then your salt might be 2% of the weight of the flour, or the water may be 70% of the weight of the flour. So you're always working on these ratios. And that's how and your bread recipes really are driven from the ratios. And when somebody gives you a recipe, if you're mixing it, and maybe the flour is just a little less moisture in it than usual, or it happens to be a humid day instead of a dry day, you have to adjust to get the right feel. And the way you know to adjust is thinking about the percentages and about how much can I add. Like if I'm going to add moisture, you don't always add a lot, just a little bit. You just want to change that percentage just a little bit, or maybe something like that. So the whole science of bread making is some basic scientific principles, and they really help you to be able to build better breads or to reproduce breads one after the other and have consistency. I want to really make a high quality bread, one loaf after the other after the other. To do that, you have to have this kind of an approach, and that's what's normally taught at a culinary school or a baker school or something special. I never attended any of those. I just read, took a few seminars. I've had a bread baking seminar with Peter. I've had one with Lionel Vatnay, is a well-known baker in Cary, North Carolina. He has La Farm Bakery, and I've had some classes with him. And then a lot of trial and error. You do stuff, and if it doesn't work, it's not good, you throw it out. Start over, try to figure out what you did wrong. Sometimes you just, when you're scaling things, whether you're always weighing things, sometimes you got it on ounces instead of grams, or vice versa, and you're mixing fast, and all of a sudden the whole recipe's screwed up. And you say, well, how did it happen? Most people just don't know, and you need to find out and fix it and be able to reproduce it. So, what I've been able to do over a number of years on the bread side, on artisan breads, and now with the tomato pie and the pizza, is have the confidence that I can bake, say, 40 pies today, and I sort of know how they're going to come out. You can't have them all over the place. I mean, otherwise people ain't coming back. And it's frustrating, when you can't reproduce something good. I'm sure, if you were a musician and you were playing a song, if you couldn't reproduce that song well, you know it, or somebody else knows it. So, it's either good or it's not. There's an honesty to making bread. It's either good or it's not good. And if it's good, there's a lot of reasons why. People think it's easy, but it's not so easy.
Kiss me. Just hold me tight and tell me you'll miss me. Well, I'm a blown blue as can be. Dream a little dream of me.
Stars fading, but I linger on, dear. Still craving your kiss. I'm longing to linger till dawn, dear. Just saying that.
Sweet dreams till sunbeams find you.
The first thing going on is we put oil around the crust. Okay, then we put a little salt on, coarse kosher salt. We're adding some other toppings tonight. People aren't asking for it, but we're doing sauteed spinach with garlic. We're doing some mushrooms, either creminis or shiitakes. It's kind of like a little, I expect every piece to be a little different, so I don't really try to get the pieces on there. And when we cut the pie, we always cut a long axis first, and then we go across. I usually cut 8 pieces. You could cut them bigger, but smaller pieces don't fold up. A little bit of cheese. That kind of finishes them off, at least how we're doing. A little basil too, if we get a chance. So we go around the outside with a pretty good amount of oil. This is olive oil. It's a mix. It's a medium blend. You don't want to have a fine olive oil or something that's aromatic, because when it hits the heat, it really gives it a funny odor. The middle blend olive oils work a lot better. We've had a big crowd tonight. I thought we were going to have 50 people. It looks like we have about 65. And baked about 42 pies. Baked a whole lot of ribs and pretty much sold out of everything. So we got one last pie. We're going to heat it up, and I'll try to describe it to you a little bit. You get a look at it. Let's get a tray. I always use these aluminum trays. It's kind of like retro. No cardboard. And these trays are better if they have a lot of cut marks on them. These are fairly new trays, but I like the old ones with got 1,000 cut marks in it. I usually cut it on the long axis, and taking out of the oven, I usually put a fair amount of olive oil around the crust. The crust doesn't have any oil on it. It basically soaks in, gets warmed up by the pie. Put a little coarse salt. If I wasn't out of mushrooms and spinach, I'd put some mushroom and spinach toppings on there. They'd get warmed up. Cut it on a long axis. Cut across. Make about 8 slices. And oh, thank you. We try to put a little corn basil on there at the last minute. Just gives it a little bit of aroma, and not so much for flavor, but just for smell. I'm just going to take a little end piece. All these pieces stand up. They stand up. They're crunchy. Tomatoes a little sweet. Got a nice char on there. Got a little sausage on there. It's my own sausage. Kind of a special mix. Can't give you the recipe on that. It's taken me too many years to figure it out. It does taste a bit like it's got some basil or maybe some fennel in there and a couple other things. So it pretty much reminds me of a DeLorenzo pizza from the 1950s. And you have to come try one sometime.
Sweet dreams till sunbeams find you. Sweet dreams to leave all worries behind you. But in your dreams, whatever they be, dream a little dream of me.